Welcome to Right Side of the Brain, the arts and health podcast created by Interact Stroke Support. Our guest in this edition is the Chief Executive of Age UK, Steph Harland. Steph has worked in the voluntary sector locally, nationally and internationally, mainly on issues to do with older people and other groups of adults with care needs. Steph first became involved with Age Concern, the forerunner of Age UK, in the late 1980s, as a volunteer for Age Concern Greenwich. This interview was recorded during the period of the lockdown. Thank you so much, Steph, for taking the time to participate in Right Side of the Brain.
Thank you.
So, Steph, if we could start at the very beginning for our listeners with the simple question of who is Steph Harland, where were you born, and who or are your parents, and what was your childhood like?
So I was born in London. I was born in the old Charing Cross Hospital, which was near Trafalgar Square. So I'm a real Londoner. And my parents, like Londoners of all generations, didn't come from London originally. They came from other parts of England. And I grew up in southeast London. I have two sisters, and we were a very happy family growing up.
And so, Steph, whereabouts in London did you grow up?
In the area of Blackheath, Kidbrooke, Greenwich, that kind of area. We lived in several different houses in around that area.
And you said that your parents, they came from other parts of the country and ended up in London. What did they do for a living?
My mum was a teacher, and my dad worked for a long time in advertising, and later on in his working life, he went to work for the National Trust, which he was very happy doing. That fulfilled a lot of ambitions for him.
And what were the aspirations of the young Steph Harland?
Well, I was a very kind of swotty sort of a child, so I was very into my schoolwork. I wasn't very good at sport and those kinds of things, so I was big into my books really, and working hard at school. I liked having fun with friends as well, but I was always quite focused on my schoolwork, I would say.
And when you say you were big into your books, was there a particular genre? Was that English literature, history? What books were you really into?
Oh, when I was a child, I always liked to read fiction. I always liked to read stories of different sorts, watch films and television. I was less interested when I was a child in the real world, and as I grew up, I became more interested in the real world around me, and less immersed in the fictional worlds that I was very, very into when I was a child.
So I'm presuming that you then went to university. Where did you go and what did you study?
I went to Oxford University and I studied English literature.
Uh-huh. And which college in Oxford did you go to?
I went to Balliol College.
And what was that like?
It was very interesting at that time because, firstly, it was a college that for hundreds of years had been for men only.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of a really quite, at that time, still a very small number of women who'd ever been in the college.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in some ways a big shock to a very ancient system to have women there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big issue during my time there. Also, it was a college which was full of people who were very political.
Mm-hmm.
It had a reputation, a well-earned reputation for being very left-wing, and people were very, very passionate about their politics and about the issues of the day. While I was at university, the miners' strike happened, and that was although we were, of course, very much living in a very privileged state of existence in Oxford University. Nevertheless, that and other issues that were going on, Greenham Common wasn't so very far away from where we were, and there were other American air bases at Upper Hayford, which was very, very near to Oxford. So we were very involved in all these kinds of issues, as well as our studies and our life at university.
So, who were your contemporaries that we may have heard of who went to Balliol at the same time as you?
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of. This is bad. I'm not thinking of anybody straight away. As somebody who was slightly younger than me and I didn't really coincide with too much was our current Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Oh yeah, right.
Um, he was a bit younger than I was, so I didn't ever really come across him.
Mm-hmm. So there you are. You've finished your degree at Balliol, Oxford. Could you then describe what your career journey was after university?
Yeah, well, I did two things after that. I was actually studying for my doctorate for some years, but the other thing that I did was at the same time I was doing a lot of voluntary work with largely with adults, older people, people with mental health problems, people with disabilities. And that was something that I had started to do when I was 18 or 19. And it was a big part of my life. So, particularly when I was a postgraduate student, I was also spending quite a lot of time uh, working as a volunteer. At that time, some of the long stay hospitals that used to exist, some of the long stay psychiatric hospitals, were still in existence. Later on, with care in the community, it came to be that a lot of those institutions were closed down. But I spent quite a lot of time as quite a young person working as a volunteer in some of those long stay psychiatric hospitals. And that was had a big influence on my life. It was a form of care that we don't see anymore. And I suspect we're all the better for it, actually, as a society.
Mm-hmm. So you said you were volunteering at these long
Mm-hmm.
stay psychiatric hospitals. How did you earn a crust though?
Oh, as I said, I was a postgraduate student at the time for a while, and in the good old days, I had a studentship. So although it wasn't a huge amount of money, in those days you didn't have to take out a loan to do it or pay yourself. I had a studentship from the government.
And then once your postgraduate studies had finished, what was your career journey?
Well, as I say, the real influence on my choices that I made at that point was what I had experienced in the voluntary work that I'd done.
Mm-hmm.
And I had come to learn a little bit about the work of Age Concern. And I thought that that would be really interesting to work for an Age Concern
Mm-hmm.
organization. And I also felt that having had a life, as we've said, in which there'd been a lot of fiction, a lot of literature, a lot of academic work, having seen the things I'd seen in some of the experiences I'd had, I didn't feel that I could spend my life in a way that ignored what the real experiences were that lots of people were having. I wanted to do something to change some of what I'd seen, and I wanted to have a life that was engaged with people, the real lives that people were living, not disconnected from them. So I went to work for Age Concern Westminster was the first Age Concern I worked for. Worked for Age Concern Greenwich before that as a volunteer in a dementia daycare centre.
So actually, from a very early age, Steph, your career path was it seems very related to age and age concern, and you're now the chief executive of Age UK. Did you work for any other charities beyond Age Concern?
Yes, I've had the opportunity to do that, which is good. I spent a really happy few years working for what was certainly then called a Council for Voluntary Service, Voluntary Action,
Hmm.
Westminster.
Hmm.
Very important organisation. We still see that they have a sort of lots of different names these days, but councils for voluntary service really bring together the whole voluntary sector in an area and are very closely engaged both with the sort of household name local charities like, for example, Age Concern as it was then, or Mind, or other sort of MenCap, other big name charities, their local um, organisations or branches, but also with very grassroots community organisations. And that was a really interesting part of my career. I later had the good fortune to go and live in Brussels for a few years, and I worked for a number of different NGOs in Brussels, again concerned with issues of disability, poverty, and age again.
And I presume because you say Brussels, it's something related to the EU. Is that right?
Well, I went there with my other half. So my other half had a job there, and we had small children. We I thought it would be interesting to go and work there, and I also knew that there were lots of voluntary organisations who were very active in Brussels, and that they were doing something. I didn't really understand very much about what it was before I went there, but that they were doing something to advance the causes in which I was interested. So I was pretty confident when I went to live in Brussels that I would be able to get involved with the work that was going on there, and so it proved.
How long were you in Brussels, Steph?
We were there for 4 years.
Steph, I read somewhere that you wanted to work with older people because of the difference between the lives of your grandparents and the older people that you'd volunteered for. And I just wanted you to, could you explain that further, please?
Sure. So, as I say, I think we were a pretty happy family growing up, and I was very lucky to have two sets of grandparents, all alive and well, for really until I was in my 20s. And one set of my grandparents lived with my uncle and my aunt. They were very important in our lives, and they were very, very much at the heart of a big extended family. My mother, on the other hand, was an only child and very, very close to her father and stepmother. And it was very much part of our upbringing that not only did we love our grandparents and spend a lot of time with them, but it was expected, it would never have been considered that they wouldn't be a big part of our lives and we wouldn't be a big part of their lives. So they were very much surrounded by their children and their grandchildren and supported in their lives by their families. They were in good. They were My grandparents enjoyed quite good health um, compared with some of the older people I met later on. They also had reasonable pensions and living conditions. But above all, what they had around them was family support that was unwavering for them. And as I grew older and I went out into the world and I began to see what the lives of other people were like, I met people who had very serious and challenging mental health and physical health problems, but people with dementia, people with long term mental health problems, people who'd lived very difficult lives, and people who didn't have anybody else around them, who didn't have that level of support and comfort, as well as love and fun and enjoyment that people get from being really strongly and solidly supported by their families. And that was quite shocking to me when I first really started to understand that there were many people who did not have their families around them in the way that my grandparents had always had.
I'm interested in something you said there, which was that your grandparents were relatively healthy. And I wonder, do you think that your grandparents' generation that largely ate organic food, didn't have anything like, processed foods and fast food like, Burger King and McDonald's, etc. Do you think that that plays a part in the the health of the latest senior citizens, so to speak?
Mm. So I'd say two things. So first of all, when we look back at the past, I think we can see that, and particularly for those people who lived all through the wartime years and the years of rationing that follow, it could well be that a part of their health in later life has been impacted by the kind of relative restriction on the food that they had available to them, and particularly the lack of sweet foods and, as you say, processed foods. My grandparents were quite lucky. In fact, I mean, genuinely lucky and fortunate in that three out of four of them at least, were born into very, very poor circumstances and wouldn't have had a great diet as small children. And they genuinely were lucky, I think, to be as healthy as they were and to survive as long as they did, given the very difficult start in life that several of my grandparents had.
Mm.
We do see, though, now people who, as you say, who are coming to be 60. I don't know. I'm looking towards that age. I'm not there yet. And 70 and 80 who have lived a very different life, who we're starting to see people reaching pension age who were born almost after rationing was, were born after rationing was ended. We've had in the last kind of 50, 60 years, we've had very, very different eating habits, much more sugar, a lot more alcohol consumed by people over time, less smoking, which is very good for people's health in later life. But as you say, also a lot of food that isn't very good for people. And I think we know that while the reduction in smoking, the better diets that some people have had over their life course have had a positive effect on current generations of older people. I think we also know that there are new problems building up. If we look at obesity, at diabetes, and alcohol, we know that there are problems that people are having now and are likely to increase in the future that are limiting or restricting or even eliminating, at the worst case, some of the progress that we have made in the last few years.
So, Steph, you're the chief executive of Age UK. What does Age UK do?
So what does Age UK do? It provides information and advice to people and support to people on a daily basis. So individual people can ring us up. They can go to our website. They can be supported by the local Age UKs across the country. And every year we are helping and supporting literally millions of people with any of the issues that they may meet in their lives. We're not a one issue organization. We have a good all round understanding of the different kinds of things that may cause people's life to be less good than it can be. And we're helping people, ideally individually, one on one, to have a better life than the one that they have currently. And there are a lot of different things we do to make that the case. We also do a lot of campaigning, policy work, advocacy work, trying to change the system, if you like, or to change our society for the better, to make our country and other countries around the world a better place to grow old.
And sorry, and what does that involve exactly?
What, campaigning?
Well, when you say you want to change society, what do you mean?
So at the moment, the top issue for us, and has been for a long time, and the pandemic has only exacerbated this, certainly in the UK, is the question of whether our health and social care systems are well enough funded, well enough organised to provide older people with the support that many people will need before the end of their lives. And that's a key concern for us, that we are very concerned about the level of funding that there is for care for older people. And we also have a lot of issues that are of concern to us about whether services are sufficiently sufficiently well organized and delivered to really meet the needs of the people that need to use them.
I see. So, how prevalent would you say that ageism is in the UK, Steph?
I think that this pandemic has reminded us that it is pretty present in our society. I don't think that we can look back at the events of the last few weeks and not recognize that ageism undoubtedly exists. And ageism takes, like other forms of discrimination that are no less important, takes a number of forms. It can, and it can be disguised or it can be obvious, I would say. So there are some forms of structural ageism. There are systemic ageism. There is straightforward ageism where which amounts to a dislike or a prejudice against or a fear of older people. There's also what some of the commentators and thinkers and other people around who work on this a lot call compassionate ageism, which is the sort of is disguised as a sort of benevolent view towards older people, but it's particularly a view of older people that infantilizes them and treats them rather as children as opposed to the adults that they are. And there's a form of ageism that simply reduces a really, really huge number of people in our society to a kind of few simple stereotypes. So ageism has many forms and many faces.
You said systemic ageism. Well, what did you mean by
Mm.
that?
For example, when we look at various forms of healthcare, we can see that healthcare, some forms of healthcare, some forms of testing, some forms of screening, some forms of orientation put more resources, more effort into younger age groups than they do into older age groups.
Hmm.
We we know that sometimes that is structural, so that there is support, resources, care available for people up to an age, and then it stops. Uh, that would be a clear example, in my mind, of structural ageism, and that's quite important, I think, particularly in relation to healthcare.
Just before we move on, Steph, one thing that I've noticed in particular in interviewing a wide range of people from the arts and the health sector is a common denominator. And the common denominator is that they all appear to be from the same political outlook. And so I just wanted to ask you, do you think that there's a wide enough diversity of opinion within the charity sector?
So the charity sector I belong to is not just a set of national charities based in London. Age UK is a big movement of organisations in the UK. We're a movement of organisations UK wide, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, in pretty much every area of the country. We have tens of thousands of people involved: staff, volunteers, trustees, management, and we have an incredibly diverse range of opinions and experiences within that movement. So I wouldn't, if what you're suggesting is that everyone in that you're referring to is, I don't know, from a sort of left liberal kind of Guardian reader end of the spectrum.
Yes, I
Certainly,
am
that's not.
suggesting that.
Yeah, yeah, that's not true for Age UK across the country at all. We have we are a, a very broad community politically, and you'll appreciate as well that we know quite a lot about what older people think, and I hope you realise from what I said I would not stereotype them, but again, older people are very, very diverse in their views, and we as organisations that work alongside them, support them, work with them, we can't afford to be narrow in our opinions or our outlook.
And so, Steph, what other charities does Age UK work with?
We work, as I've said, with our local organisations across the country. We work with all sorts of other charities who are interested in things that we are also interested in. So there's lots of great charities who are quite directly involved with older people. Clearly, there are a number of charities, for example, involved with Alzheimer's. There are all sorts of charities that are interested in older people, but there are other people with whom we have lots in common. So, for example, we're closely allied with lots of charities who work on different health conditions, because the common denominator there is it doesn't, for a wide variety of health conditions, a lot of them will be affecting a lot of older people. We are we have close alliances with charities such as housing charities. We're very interested in housing because we could talk about that, but we're increasingly worried about the growing number of older people who are private renters in particular. While our stereotype of older people, and there is some truth of that, is that they may all be owner occupiers, it's actually there are many older people renting, and we are seeing quite a lot of difficult situations of people who are in quite a precarious situation as renters. We will work with other charities. Partly our aim is to work with them to sort of see where the common cause lies. So we've recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been doing quite a lot of work around domestic violence. And I think our partners, our charity partners in that, have really welcomed that alliance, because what we're really doing, and again, this comes back to ageism, is we're kind of shining a light on the fact that domestic violence affects older people too. And that we might have an assumption that it's an issue that is mainly confined to younger and middle-aged people, but actually it can be a very serious problem amongst older people too. And what we're looking to do is not, as Age UK, is not take over every issue, but to kind of draw the attention of domestic violence charities to the needs of older people. We've carried out some research together with others on how much this is a problem that might affect older people, but also to get those services that are looking out for people, not to overlook the possibility that domestic violence is affecting older women too, particularly older women. And that's been a really fruitful discussion and partnership for us in the last 2 or 3 years. We need to work with anybody who is working on something which touches on the lives of older people.
That's really interesting what you said there, Steph, about domestic violence in relation to older people, because I'm really glad you have highlighted that, because I would never have thought of that, and hopefully a lot of our listeners will sort of get the message that actually domestic violence is not an exclusive monopoly of younger people, and particularly younger women.
Yes.
Steph, you may know, or you may not, that Interact Stroke Support are a charity that take professional actors into hospitals. We read to stroke patients on hospital wards. We do it to alleviate the depression that's so often associated with stroke. And we do it to stimulate memory and to stimulate language, which are two areas that stroke survivors are often very, very concerned about after they've had a stroke. So with that in mind, what is your view of the arts in relation to health?
I think we're getting better at understanding. I think a lot of us who are sort of coming from the kind of perspective that Age UK is, I think we're getting better at understanding just how important the arts can be for health. And if we think about what that really kind of beautiful and impressive, but also quite complex and interesting thing that you're doing really could bring to someone, we're starting to understand more that the arts can do something that's more than a nice to have. It's not a kind of cherry on the cake or just a nice thing to do, but that participation in the arts can have really a profound impact on people's lives, and on their, and as you're literally doing with the work you're doing, on their kind of brains and their mental health and their physical health as well. And as we're starting to understand that, I think some of the work that organizations such as yours have been doing over a long period of time, that shines a new light on what you're doing. And I think it's also giving new encouragement to do new, more interesting, more challenging, and ultimately more effective things with people who might really, really benefit from it. So again, when I was a very young person, uh, as I've said, I used to work in various settings with people with dementia.
Mm.
And it was very, very obvious, even even to me at that stage, that music, for example, had a profound effect on people. It touched on memory in a really interesting way. So people who could really not seem to remember very much, or be could suddenly join in and sing or respond to a piece of music when they weren't responding to very much else, and it really meant something to them, and was it also could calm people and ground them and really relieve their anxiety. Certainly while the music was lost, it could have a really, really important effect on people emotionally.
Mm.
And the more we know about what the arts can do for people, the more I think we can do two things. We can do more of it, but we can also do it better. And one of the questions, I think, is how we can support and encourage people in care settings who are often very busy to really explore what can be done, and to see how they can incorporate the arts into the care settings that
Mm.
they work in.
Yes, and one of the things we're looking to roll out is virtual readings directly into people's homes, where professional actors will read a wide variety of stories to people, either via Zoom or via WhatsApp, or the good old fashioned telephone, to people who may be socially isolated. If that is of interest to people that at Age UK, please do let us know. I mean, we're also rolling out community projects where we're getting professional actors to work with people in the community, so that people
Mm.
create their own artistic projects, working with actors, over a period
Yeah.
of weeks. And we've had a whole load of different projects come back to us, from people's versions of Desert Island discs, or their own plays that they've created. So I think that there's a lovely synergy between what Age UK does and what Interact possibly does. And it would be very interesting one day in the future for us to hopefully work together.
Yes, no, I think it would be fantastic. The other thing that we are seeing quite a lot of during this pandemic, and I'm sure you are too, is clearly while many people remain not able to access the technology, we've also seen a big leap forward for lots of
Mm.
people. So we've seen people who engage with technology partly because they've almost had to. So, but we've seen older people doing Zoom and doing teleconferences and doing video conferences of different sorts. And I think one of the thing, and that gives that level of
Mm.
interaction that I think would be really interesting for some of your work, is to enable people to listen, but also to respond together, and to see what it is. If it involves stories, what is this? How is the story speaking to them? What's their reaction to that? How is that happening? And we're seeing more. We were doing some of this anyway, but we're seeing more use of technology to get people engaging with something together in a group and interacting, and that I think will be something that stays with us and with you. And there will be things that we've tried in the last few weeks that we'll think, we might have done that to begin with because we had to, but actually we should carry on with that. That's really interesting.
Steph, you've been very gracious in your time this afternoon. So final question. Um, what's the future hold for Steph Harland? What would you like to be doing in 5 years' time?
In 5 years' time, I would expect, as I'd hope in 15 years' time, that I'll still be working in some way, that I will be contributing to the world around me. I don't know whether I will or won't be working at AGK, but what I know that I need to be from all my years of work for AGK is active, learning new things, doing new things, and giving back something to the world around me, because that is all of those things are what people need for their positive mental health in later life.
Steph Harland, thank you so much for appearing on Right Side of the Brain.
Thank you very much.
That was Steph Harland. For more information on our work, please do visit our website at www.interactstrokesupport.org. And if you're feeling generous, please do click on the big red donate button. We very much look forward to your company on the next edition of Right Side of the Brain.